and good evening, and welcome to another hour of Education Matters with Jim O'Connell. I hope you're all doing well. Thank you for joining me. It is Tuesday, the 25th of September, and it's if you're watching live, it's 6 p.m. And of course, the call-in number, as ever, is 640-3091. That's 640-3091. As ever, there are a lot of conflicting things going on at the same time on any given night. I would like to advise any of you that are watching this right now live that there is a Manchester Proud meeting on at the City Library tonight, starting at 6:30. And so much as I would like to have you here listening and watching me, if you're interested in finding out more about Manchester Proud, or if you're interested in volunteering or having input into Manchester Proud and its effort, then there's an opportunity. There will be many other opportunities. If you go on their website, they are making a real effort to step out and see as many members of the and listen to as many members of the community as possible. Over the last couple of weeks, they've had a couple of canvassing days where they've had volunteers go out and visit, knock on doors in the city of Manchester in pairs to talk to parents, citizens, members of the public, residents, and ask them about their thoughts about Manchester, and in particular public education in Manchester, because that's what they are focused on. It is the good news about that group, I guess, is that just in the last few weeks, I heard one person say, and sad as this is in other ways, but somebody said, "Oh, Manchester Proud, I look at the people involved there, and it looks like they're all it's all conservative Republicans, and so that's not for me." And then I hear somebody else said, there's a bunch of left-wing Democrats there, and so that's not for me. So I guess that's probably a good thing, right? When you're being sort of damned on both sides, then. My experience of it thus far, and my experience of it is limited. I see the declared intention, which I think is great. We'll see the proof of the pudding's in the eating, so to speak. But if everything indicates to me that this is an above-board effort to do a number of things. One of them is to understand how the community feels about education right now, but also to look at education in the city and to come to consensus, and that's a word that I would underline, to come to consensus in the community about what the needs are, and that's difficult to do, even just to reach a consensus about where we actually stand right now. But easier than reaching a consensus about what is the right thing to do to move forward. I support their efforts. I have to say that, having been involved in a number of previous, very different but similar efforts around developing 5-year plans and strategic plans, etc., for the city of Manchester. The shelves at City Hall are full with 3-ring binders that you could blow the dust off of and open up and take out, and you would find the hard work of committees and groups in the past who have looked at the school district and what its needs might be, and in the end, it's never been much of it is not acted upon. Because to act upon it requires political, that word consensus again, but more importantly, it requires political drive and ambition and etc. And we've been sorely lacking in that in our political leaders in Manchester over in the recent past. I'm sorry to paint such a broad brush, but if you judge by the product, then I think that's an accurate assessment. Besides all the good things that might have happened there. But so Manchester Proud is meeting tonight at 6:30 at the City Library. I think it's in the Winchell Room. room, but it's not that large. You won't be able to find them. I think there's another meeting going on there as well, but there is a Manchester Proud meeting at 6:30. I'm hoping to scarper over there myself once we reach the 7 o'clock hour here. I was last night. I was out in Hooksett at the Cawley Middle School. And the reason for me being there was because last night was a night in Hooksett for 8th graders who attend the middle school in Hooksett to come in and visit with the high schools. Which they are entitled to go to or can choose from. Now, Hooksett has got after they departed Manchester, which I think, of course, it should be no surprise to you if you don't know it already, but I think was a terrible retrograde move for the city of Manchester, certainly. I'm not sure it wasn't a bad move for Hooksett either, but that's sort of who am I to say. I don't live in Hooksett, and so I leave it to them to judge what they think is best for their own community. My question about it has always been, and I shared this with the members of the Hooksett School Board, especially those who were there was a group who were anti-Manchester, and then when the group of anti-Manchester people in Hooksett were met with people who were angry about what was going on in Manchester at the time when we were making large cutbacks and we were continuing to downsize and reduce offerings, etc. And there was a tipping point that was arrived at, and Mayor Gatsas, in his way, decided it was hell or the highway kind of time, and so he wasn't going to be in the he wasn't in the mode of listening to the people of Hooksett and offering them solutions. Rather, he thought by shouting at them that Manchester had the greatest schools, that if you shout loud enough, the people will just put up with that. But that was his method, and clearly it didn't work because Hooksett left in droves. And if you wanted a better example of that, because in Hooksett there were some legacy kids who remained at Central because it wasn't a precipitous everybody leave. But in the case of Candia, they took a vote in Candia the following year, and Candia voted 90-something%. More than 90% of the families in Candia voted to break their over 100-year-long connection to the Manchester school system, and they got equal shouting treatment. So. And to be fair to Mayor Gatsas, he wouldn't have called it, former Mayor Gatsas, he wouldn't have called it shouting treatment, because I'm not sure if he ever raised his voice at a shouting level, but basically I consider it shouting back because it wasn't a negotiation, it wasn't a discussion, it was like it or lump it, you're stupid to leave, if you want to leave, there's the door. So, shouting might not be the right word for that. In any case, in Hooksett, Hooksett came up with this. So the two groups met in Hooksett in the sense that the people who had always been, chip on their shoulder, sort of anti-Manchester group. There was a small but loud group of them. But then there were more sensible, thinking people who looked at what was going on in Manchester and weren't satisfied that they were getting the right bang for their buck or it was the best solution. So, but that coalition of those two groups was enough to make the decision, and so Hooksett decided to break their contract, which I think wouldn't have been up until 2023. It was at least 2021, but I think it was 23. It had to run until, but there was a court case, etc. They broke the agreement and walked off into the night. But what they replaced it with was this opportunity. It's been described as an a la carte solution for high school. So if you live in Hooksett, then when your kid is leaving 8th grade, you get to choose between a whole slew of high schools. And the town of Hooksett has got education agreements with each of these towns, and so you can send your kids there. And those schools are Goffstown High School, Bow High School, the Manchester High Schools, Central, Memorial, West, and MST. And then Pinkerton and Londonderry High Schools. I don't think I'm leaving out any, but I think that's everybody. Maybe Pembroke Academy or something too, but that's everybody. Now, so last night then at Cawley High School, It's a sort of an open house where the parents and students who are in 8th grade, who are contemplating where they're going to move for next year for high school, can come to Cawley Middle School, and the various school districts have set up shop, so to speak, in different rooms in that building, and parents can go in. There are 3 sessions back to back to back where they can go in and look at, in other words, up to 3 high schools they can go visit. So it was good. I went out last night to sort of fly the flag on behalf of Manchester. First thing I'd like to say is that I'd like to commend the fact that Mayor Craig was there. And she spent the evening there at all 3 sessions, spoke about Manchester and its commitment to its schools. Also there were Dr. Vargas, our superintendent, and Assistant Superintendent Jen Gillis was there. It was great to see a bunch of principals there. Mr. Adamakis was there from Memorial with some of his assistant principals and others. Mr. Dishard was there from Manchester West, Mr. Vacareza from Manchester Central, Ms. White from MST with some other teachers and administrators. It was great to see all that many people from Manchester out in Hooksett in the evening, after dark, doing the work of pushing their pride in their schools and offering to these students in Hooksett and their parents a lot of what Manchester had to offer. It was also nice to see the students there. West had its ROTC cadets there looking very sharp in their dress uniforms. There were 3 or 4 young people there, and also I didn't pay attention to the Memorial kids. They were at one side, and but I did at the Central. I mean, Memorial, no disrespect. I just didn't happen to engage with them last night. And then from Central High School, they had a bunch of musicians there. So it was wonderful to see some great band members there, and they had. A bunch of kids, one young man on drums, and then somebody on piano, another person on trombone, and there was a 4th, whatever they were playing. But they played little pieces and showed people the music, the great music department that is at Central, but also at all the other schools as well. And that is something that Manchester continues to do well. So that was a great thing from a community point of view to see Manchester together, and the superintendent spoke, the mayor spoke, the superintendent spoke, then the principal spoke on behalf of each of the 4 schools. The sad part about it was that the audience was very small for the Manchester schools. It was better than the audience for Bow or Goffstown, which, by the way, are 2 very good high schools. But I witnessed nobody actually, like empty rooms where they were because there were different schools in different rooms. But the propensity of students were at the Pinkerton presentation and another and at the Londonderry High School. But I think just if I was counting heads, I would have thought that Pinkerton was the highest number. I think it's so. This is an improvement over previous years, because at other times in the last couple of years since this has gone on, our showing at the Cawley event has been underwhelming. So it was nice to see those people out there. But in the end, it highlights. The two-headed monster of perception and reality. The people of Hooksett, who are not from the moon, they're not a million miles away, they're not divorced from everything that goes on. Actually, if you scratch the surface, the majority of people that I know from Hooksett are former Manchester residents, or their parents came from Manchester, or they used to live in Manchester. So there are very strong connections with Manchester, and most of the town attended Manchester School District in the past. So there are strong links there, and also they don't live in a bubble, as I said. They know what's going on in Manchester. So we had people talking last night about steam ahead at West. they were talking about Velcro University at West, um, and the mayor talked about the opportunities in the city with Army and all the exciting things happening in the city, etc. But in the end, from the evidence of the numbers, people weren't actually buying it. Manchester needs both a more compelling story, but it can't overcome the reality. The perception isn't as good as it should be, but the reality of having the least well-funded school system in the state and the biggest class sizes in the state are just a bridge too far. All the rhetoric in the world can't get you beyond, let's use some of these metrics. People use certain things to measure. It's very hard to use to measure one school against another because it depends on so many variables, and in the end, it's a subjective decision anyway for everybody. But when the easy way to examine which schools are better and which are not so good. Sometimes people will look at the simple metrics, and those are things like, well, how much do you spend per student? Oh, wow. And that's the lowest in the whole state? Oh, wow. And okay, well then tell me about class sizes. How do you do compared to these other high schools for class sizes? Oh, they're higher than everybody else? Oh, wow. So you can talk about the great schools, and I'm happy to talk about that. There are great things. I have kids in Manchester schools. If I thought that they were doing my kids damage or something, I've said many times they wouldn't be there. But it is true that our schools are finding it difficult they're finding it difficult, period, and then they're finding it difficult to tell this story. Something needs to be done. I think that the people at Manchester Proud is another example of people stepping forward. And by the way, at that meeting last night in Hooksett at Cawley, which I was delighted to see, by the way, Manchester Community Television was there to film the thing, and so I presume it'll be on Channel 22 at some point, or perhaps it's there already and you can review it. But who were there also were the people from Arthur Sullivan, from Brady Sullivan was there and spoke, which was great. And then also Mr. Brensinger from La Valley Brensinger Architects, who are I think the co-chairpersons or joint chairpersons of Manchester Proud, were there, and they talked about the commitment of the business community to education in the city and what was going on, etc. So it was nice to see educators, students, administrators, superintendent, assistant superintendent, the mayor, and there were some parents there as well from Manchester to support their schools, and that was a good thing to see that happen. The sad part is that you could have created some really nice literature for last night and something glossy, and maybe that's something that people will look at. I know that some of our high schools have looked at producing some sort of more than a pamphlet, but something that would represent all the amazing things that go on in the school, and for these sort of occasions, to say, look, here's a reason to come to us. That planning is still in the planning stage, hopefully, with the many talents that we have in our high schools and the capacity of places like MST to do design and things, and students studying design. Marketing is being taught at all our high schools, so I think that it's a place for our students to step into with guidance of teachers and produce some supporting material for our schools. But in the end, it's very hard to overcome the obstacles that our political leadership has put in our way and refuses to do anything about. I'm hopeful that the Manchester Proud investigation, for want of a word, when it looks at where we are today, that these basic truths about the fact that our school system does not have the resources it requires, it's not funded well enough and needs to be funded better, that they will reach that conclusion. I think it's almost impossible to reach another conclusion. I expect that to be the conclusion to be reached, unless somebody puts their finger on the weighing scales, or unless it's a political view that says, not a penny more. Then clearly, when you're the least well-funded school system in the state, then whatever else you might say might need to change in the city. Spending less than everybody else certainly has to change. And at that point, the conversation becomes, and how do we resolve that? And the answer, of course, cannot be that the answer is that that the people of Manchester, the property owners of Manchester, should reach deeper in their pockets and just pay out of a hell of a lot more for public education. I do believe they should pay more, to be clear, but the problem is not going to be solved by putting putting the cost on the shoulders and in the pockets of the property owners of Manchester. Clearly, the downsizing or the sending down of costs from the state of New Hampshire to towns like Manchester has got to come to an end. So the close to $5 million now that it's costing per year the city of Manchester to fund the state pension funds, at about $50,000, cost per year per teacher. That's a rough calculation. $5 million would be 100 teachers, and 100 teachers across our schools would, albeit that we managed to fire 165 or 164 6 or 7 years ago, or 5 or 6 years ago, 6 years ago now. 100 teachers is a huge amount, and that one cost, the pension cost that's being pushed down to Manchester, that one cost alone is worth about 100 teachers to the city of Manchester. And we have a vote coming up, ladies and gentlemen, in November, where you're going to get to decide who's going to be the governor, who's going to be on the executive council, who's going to be your senator, and who are going to be your representatives in the House. So if you waved a magic wand tomorrow, you could change, everything could change starting in January when people take their seats, and you could have a legislature that says we're going to stop living off the backs of the property owners in our cities, and we're actually going to pony up and pay for an adequate education, or pay more towards an adequate education for our students. As a public representative, I think any public representative who takes a moral view, and a view in the light of what is just and what is morally correct, and looks at the current funding of education in the state of New Hampshire, I think it is clear that there's an injustice that goes on when you have towns spending from $32,000 per student to $20,000 per student to $17,000 and $18,000 per student to $15,000 per student, all the way down to Manchester at the bottom at $11,000 per student. And clearly, it doesn't make any sense that the towns with the highest level of free and reduced lunch, i.e., poverty levels, and with the highest urban challenges, are the ones who can least afford to pay for their education. So I'm hopeful that Manchester Proud goes out, listens to the people, but sometimes you have to lead as well. And it would be wonderful to be back in Hooksett at Cawley Middle School in a year from now, or 2 years from now, when a robust plan has been developed and people have bought into it. And I'm hopeful here, and I've said this to the people involved in Manchester Proud, I hope that there can be some agreement reached, not just something written on paper, but something with teeth, that says we're all agreed that we're going to make the best effort as a community to decide what is best for our community, and for our schools in our community. And whatever we agree, whether you like the solution or not, you're not going to try and block it. You're going to support it and move forward. Because there are some people, the ones on our boards, who dislike public schools and don't have much time for public education. And sadly, these people continue to run for public office and for school boards because I don't know why they see the need to run for boards where they want to destroy the thing that they're supposedly running to deal with. But however, that's for another day. But I've said to people that I hope that the agreement is that people will do, because I may not like what the solution is. Whatever the solutions that these people come up with, it may involve things that are very distasteful to me and to my friends. But I'm willing to make the commitment. I believe we need change. So whatever the change is, let there be change, provided that it's changed from people who actually support the public good. And in this case, public education. So kudos to the mayor and those who were out in Hooksett last night and the parents who were there and the kids who were there. Once again, you hear all this talk all the time about, the young people of today. I'm so sick and tired, ladies and gentlemen, of reading on social media and listening to people talking about the young people of today and how they don't have manners anymore and they're not taught by their parents to do this, that, and the other thing. And, woe is me, the whole world is terrible. And nothing could be further from the truth. It's just a load of, I see young people who are smart and intelligent and well-spoken and well-mannered and organized and learned and ready to take on the world. I have every confidence in the generation of students and young people that we produced in the last 10 years and that we're producing right now, that they're as equipped and actually better equipped than generations who went before. The advent of the internet and the ability to get information at a moment's notice, right there in your hand at any one time, the knowledge that kids are carrying around in their heads by the time they're 15, and their ability to access it. So it's not just what they have in their heads, but the fact that they can find out anything that they need. Aren't there kids sitting around staring at their phones, chewing gum, and with their feet up and staring at the ceiling? Yeah, the lazy and the unorganized and the late developers will always be with us. But you've just got to step out into the world and look at some of these kids, and there is no reason for there to be any alarm or disquiet or worrying about what the future may bring. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, if anybody has any comments, I'd be happy to hear from you. The number is 640-3091. So another couple of things. The Dr. Vargas's coffee with the and meet and greet, or whatever it is that it is called. What is it called? I don't know. What is it called? Someone help me here. Anyway, coffee with the superintendent, I think it's called. But the next one is actually on a week from now, so it's on October 3rd at 7:30 in the morning at McDonough Elementary School, and then the following day, October 4th, at 4:30 at Jewett Street School. So if you'd like an opportunity to talk to the superintendent about any concerns you have about schools or buses or buildings or athletics or academics or social programs or whatever it is that concerns you, or if you've got kids in the schools, or if you're at home and you've got kids about to enter our schools and you're thinking about where should I send them and where's the best place, Dr. Vargas does a wonderful job of coming out in the afternoon and early in the morning. 7:30 in the morning is always a great time. Everybody's, some of us can go before you go to work. It's short and sweet. It's very informal. And so 7:30 on October 3rd at McDonough and 4:30 at Jewett Street on October 4th. I have to tell you that we know there was an incident that happened in Manchester, and a young man sadly was murdered 2 weeks ago or so, and it happened on Hanover Street, a few blocks not too distant from Central High School. And as a result, there was a lockdown, and people got much agitated about it. The school was never in any danger. It was done out of an abundance of caution. but the high schoolers were locked down there, and it sadly, even though it had nothing to do with the school, and I had never any doubt that my child who's there was perfectly safe, and my kids who were there previously have been perfectly safe. The school is as safe a part of it's as safe as any place there is in Manchester. Um, and But yet there was a lockdown, etc. And so a lot of people had a lot to say on social media about they should have done this and they should have done that and they should have done the other thing. Um, what was of note was that so that was on a Friday, and then the following, which is just over 2 weeks ago now, and then the following Thursday, just 6 days later, it just so happened, something that had been pre-scheduled many weeks before, there was a coffee with the superintendent gathering at 4:30 p.m. at, guess where, Central High School. So 6 days later, there was an opportunity for the community, all 100,000 plus of them, or the parents of the 13,500 kids in the Manchester school system, or the parents of the 1,600 or 1,500 students at Central High School, to come and talk to the superintendent, offer suggestions, offer condemnation, pull their hair out, pull his hair out, hopefully not. And the good news is that obviously people weren't that agitated by anything that happened, despite what the mutterings in people's online chats and the chattering class on public television and elsewhere had to say about all of this. 6 days later, I had an opportunity to meet with the superintendent, and of course the principal, Mr. Vaclareza, was there also. I walked into that room at 4:30 on that Thursday, expecting to see quite a few people. And when I went in, there were 3 students there who had something to say about things generally. There was myself as a parent. There was one other parent there who also happens to be a teacher in another district. And there was a gentleman there who was the grandparent of some Central students. So 3 people were at the meeting, and of course Dr. Vargas and others were there to represent the school district. So the good news is there wasn't a huge crowd there shouting and screaming, "What's happening with my kid, and I'm so worried about it." The bad news is there wasn't a crowd there shouting and screaming about, why, what's happening with my school, and is everything okay, etc., etc., etc. So I found that disturbing, because because I worry about the apathy thing, right? I think when things go very wrong at some point, there are sort of people out with burning torches if God forbid, everything ever goes really badly. But it'll tell you the level of engagement by the community, the community, the level of engagement in schools and school issues. It'll be interesting to see how many people are at the Manchester Proud meeting tonight. There is actually, the timing is funny because there's a meeting coming up at City Hall at 7 o'clock. So if you're watching the clock, you have just 25 minutes or so to. And you're watching this on Tuesday the 25th. There's a meeting tonight at City Hall, a school board meeting, where multiple topics are being dealt with. So if you're not going to the Manchester Proud meeting that started 3 or 4 minutes ago, then you have the City Hall, the meeting at City Hall. But in the end, people get they get the government they deserve, they get the leadership they deserve. While our school board and Board of Mayor and Aldermen are not up for re-election in November, our state officers are, and of course our congressional delegation as well, at least not on the Senate side this year, but on the congressional side. And so I urge you, voter registration, don't leave it go. Go out, register. If you're not going to be in Manchester or at your home polling place on that date in November, then I would urge you to I would urge you to, get an absentee ballot, and especially if you've got young people who've moved out of town and are if they're leaving someplace else, of course they will vote there. But if they are students, there are a lot of students from Manchester who are at universities. They're at even at UNH but St Anselm's or out in Keene or up in Plymouth or wherever they may be, UMass Lowell or down in Boston or from Manchester sends students. Two of my kids are 5-6 hours away. Please encourage them to get an absentee ballot and vote in November. Obviously, I'd like you to vote in favour of candidates who support public education, but at least vote. There's no excuse. So I wrote this down here with 2 exclamation points after it tonight. Voter registration, get out and vote. It really does matter who you vote for. We have up in Concord, we have people, even Manchester representatives, who are voting against the interest of Manchester taxpayers and Manchester schools all day long. We have, people from whatever it's called, the Free State Project people, FSP. And their followers, who are a very small group, but they're active in state politics. And as I've said, if you don't know how stupid things have gotten, there are public representatives elected by the people of New Hampshire sitting in the House in Concord who are open and are expressing their views openly that they do not believe in public education. I've had conversations with our representatives in Concord, some of whom have said to me that any exercise of any time that any money is spent by the state or federal governments or even city government for that matter for education is an unconstitutional expenditure of money. That because public education is not mentioned in the Constitution, therefore there should be none. And I challenge these people and say, so what happens? Because this seems to me, and I don't mean to be derogatory about them or ad hominem or anything. So when I say I think it's like lunacy and I think they're lunatics, I mean, I think their views they may be lovely people. I frankly can't understand them, so I don't make any claim to. But the fact is, at one point, I would have thought a whole room would just bust out laughing, kind of like what happened with Donald Trump today at the UN when everybody laughed at him. But that's less funny. But to say that there should be no schools and no public education, that should all be private, and that if you have kids, then plan on paying for their education. If you don't want them educated, well, then just don't. And that's a viable opinion to have. And that the fact that we have public representatives sitting in Concord voting with that mindset should tell you how bad things are. And if you don't know, and I know many of you don't, there are people who don't know their public representatives and have no idea who they're going to be voting for, and they're going to walk into the polling booth and they'll know they're going to vote for somebody for governor, and they'll have somebody in mind for hopefully my friend Chris Pappas for the 1st Congressional District, and but after that they may not know, and they'll check some boxes after some names, and believe me, ladies and gentlemen, it's just all stupid. You're doing yourself a disservice because these people are pushing money down out of your pockets every day of the week. Remember, it's a sheep in a lion in sheep's clothing here, because they're the people who have the biggest signs that say no new taxes and we'll reduce spending. What they'll actually do is go up to Concord and reduce spending in Concord and pass it back down to you, so you'll have to pay the bill as a Manchester taxpayer. And it doesn't matter whether if you're a tenant and in the property in Manchester, it's the same thing. You end up paying taxes too. This idea that tenants don't pay taxes is nonsense, right? Because real costs are real costs, and landlords and property owners pass them down. It's just how it is. But you've got to pay attention, ladies and gentlemen. This opportunity is now it's 7 weeks away. Less than 7 weeks away, or 7 weeks away from tonight, for you to take a moment, find out who your candidates are, and then vote for people who actually believe in public education. They may all have different ideas about the right way to do it, but they actually fully believe in public education and believe that public education ought to be well funded, and we should have schools that we're all proud of. And you will find that there are many people who don't actually share that view, but they won't always tell you to your face when they're standing on your at your doorway. I don't want to take cheap shots, but I mentioned a minute ago about President Trump today at the United Nations, and this may not be the venue for it because we talk about education, but he did speak to the United Nations today. I thought it was an appallingly ignorant speech, delivered like a third grader as usual, but. When President Trump was running for office, he said that the United States was being disrespected around the world, and that because of bad trade deals that we've never actually seen those actually specified in any way, but because of bad trade deals that people were laughing at us. Well, the first time I've ever seen, I think, any politician, but certainly the first time I've ever seen a president of the United States of America openly laughed at by the leaders of the world in the United Nations chamber was today. And what he said was ludicrous and stupid and ignorant and untrue and indefensible. And they didn't laugh through the rest of his speech because they were very polite and people clapped at all the right times because most people are decent people in the end. But when you say something that's ludicrous, like his is the greatest presidency even after a year and a half, etc., it's ludicrous it's just a ludicrous statement. And so when you find the whole room of people you don't know laughing at what you just said because it's so ridiculous, I think it's, besides all the other examples we've had of, standing over in Helsinki and disrespecting our intelligent community and etc. It's appalling. I don't know. I understand, ladies and gentlemen, that there are 35% of you out there, a full 1/3 of you, that like things about President Trump, and I understand that. Actually, I don't understand that. I respect that, though. That people are entitled to their opinions. I don't expect everybody to agree with me, but I find it just amazing and appalling. I'd like to talk about a couple of other things. I've talked about schools tonight, and I haven't, and it's a subject that I've stayed away from more generally. And even when we had the president and vice president of the teachers union, the MEA here, and they always have a seat here, by the way, or anybody else does too. Let me take a sidebar here a minute. I mentioned last week that I wanted to reach out to some people whose names had been used on this program, some of our public representatives, and invite them and give them the opportunity to come on here and to represent themselves, etc. And I just want to make it a sort of a standing, open invitation that anybody, regardless of who they are, who is a candidate for office in Manchester or or in the region or in the state, any candidate for office or any member of any of our boards, school board, board of mayor and aldermen, I am happy to give airtime and it's an open invitation to all of you. If you would ever like to come on here and shout me down, talk me down, explain to me where I'm wrong, or tell me fill me with false praise if you want. But whatever it is, it's not about the content of what you will say. If you're here to talk about education in particular, and to further education in Manchester and represent your views about what you think will be right. If you're a public representative or candidate, it's easy to contact me. Get a hold, give me a shout. You can get me on email, James O'Connell with 2 N's and 2 L's. Go to jamesoconnell80@gmail.com, and I'll always respond. I'm sure if you were to call the station here, they would find a way of getting a hold of me also. But I'd be very happy to listen to you. But so I have had the leaders of the MEA on here, and I've stayed away pretty much from the issue of the contract, the teacher's contract, and et cetera, because it's not. I'm not a teacher, and so I always say to people when they ask me, well, they're big boys, they can look after themselves, and big girls, and they can look after themselves then. But frankly, I am just, I don't know what the right word is, disappointed at minimum, but deeply concerned that our teachers are in the classrooms working with no contract. And so there are programs being cancelled all across the school district, and kids are being. I'll give you one example right now. So every year there's homecoming at the high schools. It's one of the fun events that kids remember, and when you meet friends, when you're out for a night 10 years later, and you remember remember at homecoming in 1997 we all did this, or remember homecoming and when we did that, remember that event at homecoming in 2012, or whatever it may be. Well, there will be no homecoming this year. For these high schools because of the teacher contract issue. Is that the end of the world? No. A much bigger thing is the fact that we're not paying our teachers, that they have to pay the additional costs of what it costs to live and inflation, etc. It looks like that the Federal Reserve will increase interest rates again tomorrow, and they will telegraph an increase, it's likely, for December as well. And so costs are going up all the time. The cost of, a gallon of gas, oil's gone above $70 a gallon, so we'll see that in the pumps in between now and Christmas. And teachers have to pay those bills, and they have to pay for their oil, to heat their houses, etc. And we as a community have an obligation to compensate them, and we're not doing it. And some of the chattering class online, who it's the same half dozen, semi-anti-teacher people who are on all the time, and I just think it's terribly disrespectful and damaging to our teachers and to our school district that we can't find a way out of this impasse. Now, I have to tell you that I spoke briefly to the mayor last night, and of course we have the fire department, who we're now down to, we had 47 men and women per shift in Manchester, and as of last week we're down to 37 men or women per shift in Manchester. I'm not a firefighter. I don't know what that means. I don't know the difference between having 4 people on a truck and having 3 people. I know it could make a hell of a difference if your house is going on fire and there are a quarter of the people who are usually used to be around are not around anymore because we couldn't afford to pay them any longer. Things have reached a sorry state in the city of Manchester when here we are in the 5th or 6th richest state in the United States, where the economy is doing well. The wealthy are more wealthy than they've ever been before. American corporations have more money on their books than they've ever done before. $1.5 trillion of it, of course, borrowed from our grandchildren to be to make them all richer, so they can buy their stock back and increase their stock value. So if you have, 1 million shares in General Electric, you're probably doing very well. If you don't, not so much. But it's appalling to me. We put up with this in 2008 and 2009. I was told by my fiscally conservative friends that, we had to make all these cutbacks. We had to fire teachers. We couldn't afford to buy equipment for schools, and we couldn't afford to keep up to date with stuff because the economy was after declining, and these were tough times. Well, they're not tough times anymore, and yet, what are we doing? Our fire service is being reduced in size, and our teachers are going to school without salaries. Our class sizes are the biggest in the state, and our political leadership has got no answer to any of it. In the last budget, not a penny was put aside for teacher salaries. Now, everybody knew that there was an increase due. You can argue about how much they're due. If you think they should all get a pay cut in real terms, then that puts you in a different class. But, The teachers of Manchester deserve to be paid a reasonable salary, and if you think what they're getting right now is reasonable, then they deserve a cost of living increase as a minimum. And the fact that they're not getting it, and that there's an impasse, and there's no consideration. I listen to these, to be frank, buffoons. I could use stronger words, but I listen to buffoons speaking on social media saying that if the MEA, the teachers' union, doesn't want to come to the table to negotiate without having salaries on the table, then to heck with them. And I'm like, hang on a second. So you want the teachers to sit down at the table with a school district that has no money in its budget to pay them anything. So there's only one thing can happen in this negotiation now. I want you to come and put a new boiler in my house, and I want to negotiate with you. But before you start work, I'm telling you, I actually, you know and I know, I have no money to pay you. So now it's just a question of whether you'll give me the boiler for nothing, whether you'll take 10 cents a week over 50 years, whether you'll give me half a boiler. What can you do for me? That's what the city of Manchester, that's the negotiation that, I'm going to use the word again, buffoons, if they just listen to themselves. I've listened to certain foolish people, unintelligent people, talk about how, it should be a blank slate. Well, that sounds like nice rhetoric. It should be a blank slate. Yes, every side come to the table with a blank slate. So let the city come to the table with a blank slate also, and decide what is the right and just thing to do. And if that was the question, then clearly we'd know what the answer is. The teachers ought to be paid a living wage. They ought to be paid, let's say, the state average as a minimum. Given that they're teaching more kids in terms of productivity than any other teacher in the state, they probably should be paid more, because we're squeezing more out of our teachers than all the other towns are. That's just a statement of fact, ladies and gentlemen. That's not Jim O'Connell's, idea. That's just a statement of fact. And then I've got somebody on the line here. Go ahead, caller. Hello, you're on the air.
Hey, Jim, how are you? It's Phil.
Hi, Phil. How are you? Good to hear from you.
Well.
How are things? What's going? What do you have to share with us?
A couple things. I want to thank you for doing your show.
Thank you, Phil. Appreciate that.
I think you're spot on a lot of issues.
Thank you.
I would agree with you about 99% of the time, which you know.
Okay.
But I would like to just point out one thing.
Yep.
When it came time to, I don't want to say point fingers because I don't think that's what you're doing,
right,
but point out responsibility and what's going on.
Yep.
You use the term our conservative friends. I get that.
Right,
and
yep.
I have a liberal point of view.
Yep.
And I believe, as you do, in a lot of the things you stated.
Right.
Conservative friends that you speak of really believe what they believe.
Yes.
For that, I respect them.
And by the way, if you were listening, I talked about a minute. I spent like 1 minute perhaps on President Trump today, and I said that 35% of people out there, support President Trump. I'm always careful to call him President Trump. And I said, and I used the word respect, and I respect it. I don't understand it, but I respect it. In the same way as my conservative friends, it's not about respect or not, but I was disagreeing with them about the issue of when they were telling me that we couldn't borrow a dime, we couldn't spend a dime, we had no money when times were bad, I took them at their word. My question for them now is, now the times are not bad, where's the quid pro quo? Why don't we have the opposite in effect?
Right. Well, I'm not talking nationally or even state. I want to go local.
Yeah, and I was talking about our school. I was talking about our schools here in Manchester, Phil, where our politicians here in Manchester were telling us from 2008, 9, and 10 when they're firing 160 teachers and letting people go, and the classes are getting bigger, and we had to listen to even though I didn't agree, we had to listen to them and say, okay, this is the conservative point of view. We can't afford to spend when times are bad. Now I'm putting it back on their court and saying and some of them are still serving on these boards, right? And they supported all this crap. And I'm saying to them, where's the quid pro quo?
I want to point this out. It's not our conservative friends that are the problem. They're not going to change.
Well, that doesn't give them an excuse. That doesn't give them a free vote.
Let me finish, please. They're true in their beliefs.
Yep.
So they're true in their beliefs.
Yep.
let's be frank. We'll use some names. Mayor Gatsis is gone, so he cannot no longer be the punching bag. And I'm
Right.
not sticking up for him.
Right.
In my opinion, he was part of the issue of teachers not getting what they deserved or underfunding in education.
Right.
And you know I'm a friend of his.
Yes, you are.
That
I know.
being said, okay, that
Yep.
being said,
Yep.
now it's Rich Gerard's fault.
It is?
I don't think you believe for a minute that Rich Gerard has the power in this city to really be the driving force of the teacher's contract. He may have a position, he may
Right.
be on a committee, he may actually chair a committee, whatever the case may be. But my point is this. Why don't we talk to our liberal friends that are for public servants, that are for the public good, for the common person, for the working person, for the union person, for those that contribute,
Right.
for those that don't have the silver spoon, and let's really get down to it. Their silence, whether it's the firefighters, the teachers, whatever it may be, their silence is deafening.
Right.
And I would love for that to be the focus of what we're talking about.
Okay, so let me say, I take that point and I'll address it. I'll tell you what, we're down, just so you know, we're getting the 2-minute warning here on my screen, so I don't want to sort of cut you off precipitously. But I hear what you're saying loud and clear. I don't believe for a minute. So first of all, I don't give. I hate dividing people into classes like our conservative friends, etc. But those people who were saying I don't give them any pass just because they're so supposedly sincere in their beliefs, and they may well be. That doesn't mean they're not as wrong as anybody else. I know from the past and from what you say, you're talking about there's a sort of a hypocrisy or a duplicity about people who would purport to be strong supporters of public employees, and yet they're silent. And I think
Right. Now,
I take
let
that
me
point.
speak to that, please, for a minute.
We only have a minute, Phil.
About the corporations having more money than they've ever had. And,
Right.
And I agree with you.
Right.
We have school board members that are living in $1 million homes, that have multiple homes, that have pensions, that have
Right.
vacation places, that own multiple properties in Manchester,
Right.
that are taking health insurance, and their students that have nothing aren't getting what they need. That's preposterous.
You're absolutely
and that's
right.
where I want the focus to be. Forget the contract.
Yeah.
How about if we worry about Johnny and Cindy and Harry and Mary getting the speech and the OT and the reading program and the math support and a new book every 15 years? Forget the other stuff.
Right. Right. No, I agree. I understand that.
Like you say when you say, look at the shiny bell over here. Forget
Yeah.
Rich Gerard.
Right.
Let's look at the people that are supposed to be helping us.
So
let's get some books, let's get some
Right.
services, and let's take the health insurance away.
Okay. All right, Phil. Thank you. We're down to
Thank
less
you
than a
so
minute.
much.
I appreciate it, Phil. Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye. Bye. Ladies and gentlemen, we're down to the last half minute. The only person mentioning Rich Gerard on this show is Phil, and so that's not. I wasn't alluding to him in any way. His face or thoughts or anything else weren't in my mind about any of this. I just think it's terrible in the city of Manchester, and this is goes for everybody across all boards and all political stripes. The fact is, as a city, it is shameful that, and I do agree 100% on the healthcare thing. It is abominable that people with wealth are taking free healthcare from the public good when there are kids not getting the services they deserve. It's just. If you ever got a photograph, like the kid with the Moore bowl in the Charles Dickens, and put him next to some of the rich people who have health insurance for free as public representatives, the juxtaposition would be glaring. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry we have to leave. Please go register to vote if you haven't already. Educate yourselves. Get ready to vote next month. It's 7 weeks away. I'll see you next week. Have a great week. God bless everybody. Bye-bye.